So, using the map on journal page 112, start at your hometown. Plan a driving trip that takes you to 4 other cities on the map. If your hometown's not on the map, find the nearest city on the map to your hometown. Start your driving trip from this city. So, here is the map. And unfortunately, Bensalem is not listed on the map. The closest city for us is going to be New York City. So we're starting in New York City, and I'm deciding to travel from New York City to Washington, D.C. first. I'm going to use a highlighter to highlight the distance. New York City to Washington, D.C. On the line that connects the two cities, I see a number above and a number below. The number above, 235, represents the number of miles. The number below, 4 hours, 25 minutes, represents the amount of time that it takes to get to that city by traveling. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out my worksheet first. Number 1. So I am traveling from New York City to Washington, D.C. I'm going to abbreviate Washington, D.C. The driving distance on the map said 235 miles, and the driving time in hours and minutes was 4 hours, 25 minutes. Now they're asking for us to list the rounded time. Boys and girls, when we round with decimals or whole numbers, we have a general rule of, if it's 5 or above, kind of give it a shove. 4 or below, leave it alone. And the 5 is the halfway mark between any, 2 sets of 10 numbers. So when it comes to time, we're going to use 30, that half past, as our halfway mark. Since this is 425, which is a little less than exactly 430, we can round it down to about 4 hours. All right, so now I'm in Washington, D.C. Where am I going to go next? Take a look at my map. I think for my next location, I might head to Wilmington, North Carolina. Use a different color highlighter to make it a little bit easy. So now I'm traveling from Washington, D.C. to Wilmington, North Carolina. So I need to fill that in on my travel log. Washington, D.C. to Wilmington. That's 363 miles, and it's 6 hours, 50 minutes. All right, again, rounded time. Since it's 6 hours and 50 minutes, which is definitely past 6 hours, 30 minutes, we're going to round this up to 7 hours. All right, my next location, I think I'm going to head from Wilmington to Jacksonville, Florida. Wilmington to Jacksonville is 415 miles, and it's 7 hours, 50 minutes. Obviously, we can round that up to an 8-hour trip. And finally, one more location. Here I am in Jacksonville. I think I'm going to head from Jacksonville over to New Orleans. Jacksonville to New Orleans. One more time. Number on the top is the mileage. Number on the bottom is the amount of time. I know it's hard for you to see on the map, but you can be looking at page 112 in your journal as we go along. Jacksonville to New Orleans. That's 582 miles. and it's exactly 11 hours, which will be really easy to round because we can leave it at 11 hours. All right, question 2. Estimate how many miles you will drive in all. So now it's going to be important for us to take a look at our driving distance and estimate those numbers. Let's start with New York City to Washington, D.C. The actual distance is 235 miles, and so if we were to round, we could round that maybe easily to 230 or 240. Since this ends in a 5, we're going to want to go up to 240 miles. Right. 363, would we round that to 360 or to 370? Stop for a minute and talk to your partner. Decide whether to round it down to 360 or up to 370. Hopefully you said to round it down to 360. You would be correct. All right, 415 miles. We would round it down to 410 or up to 420. What should we do? Stop and turn to a partner. All right, in this case, since this is a 5, we need to round it up to 420. And finally, for 582 miles, our choice is to leave it at 580 or up to 590. In this case, we'll leave it at 580. All right. And so these are the estimated amounts that we have that now we need to add up together. All of these zeros added together still equal 0. 4 plus 6 is 10, plus 2 is 12, plus 8 more is another 10. That would be 20. Okay? 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 3 is 7, plus 4 is 11, plus 5 is 16. 1,600 is the estimated amount of miles that we've traveled. You will probably have a different answer since you might have taken a different trip. Estimate how many hours you will drive in all. Now, the good news is we've already rounded our hours right up here. 4 plus 7 is 11, plus 8 is 19. So we now need to add the 19 plus 11. And we get 30. So about 30 hours total we'll be traveling. Tell how many days it will take to complete the trip if you plan to drive about 8 hours each day and then stop somewhere for the night. So this might be a little bit confusing. It's easier than you think. Think about if you were to take a trip somewhere. It's not very often that we drive straight through for 30 hours without stopping to rest or stopping to get something to eat. And so in this case, we really want to plan on just traveling about 8 hours a day. So you're sort of looking to take this number 30 and divide it by 8. It's not going to be exact. Think about your 8's times tables. 8 times 3 is 24, which is sort of close to 30. And 8 times 4 is 32, which goes just a little bit over 30. So I'm going to go with the 4 days, because that sort of makes sense. If you decide to do 8 hours per day, you would do 8 hours of driving on the first day, 8 hours the second day, that would be 16. 8 hours the third day, that would be 24. And on the fourth day, it would get you up to 32 if you drove all of 8 hours. In this case, on the fourth day, we would only be driving about 6 hours, and we would wind up in New Orleans at our final destination. But we definitely need time on that fourth day. 1, 2, 3, 4 days. All right. Number 5 asks us to explain, meaning use words, to tell how we got the answers for numbers 2 to 4. First of all, what we want to say is that we rounded each distance. In this case, we rounded to the nearest 10. Now, notice that I'm not actually listing the driving distances right here in my answer. I don't have to do that. I can just use words for my explanation. That takes care of question number 2. What about number 3? I added the rounded times to get the estimated hours. That's pretty easy. We already had the rounded times, so we just added those together. All right, that takes care of number 3. Finally, we have number 4. Number 4, I'm going to say that I divided the estimated 30 hours by 8, and I got 4 days. Remember, when we were actually doing that, we wound up with 3 days and then some 6 hours left over. 8 could not divide into 30 exactly, but we already discussed the reason for adding that 4th day because we have the extra 6 hours. All right, so boys and girls, it's important to think about a few things as we complete this journal page. Number 1, how do you think the distances and travel times between cities were obtained? How do you think they got that amount of time and mileage on this map? Stop and talk with a neighbor. All right, basically, up-to-date maps were used to find routes and distances between cities. And they would use a typical speed, boys and girls, like the speed limit, 60 miles per hour. All right, and we sort of assumed that for all drivers and all routes. If the distances and the times, if these were measured again, would it be reasonable to expect the exact same results? Stop and talk with a neighbor. All right, it's reasonable to expect very close results, maybe the same in some instances, but maybe ones that are just very close. There might be more than one equally good route with maybe a slightly difference in time. What do you think is a sensible way of reporting distances and travel times? Do you think you would see exact numbers? Or would you use estimates within a certain range, rounded to a certain place? What are your thoughts? Stop and talk to a neighbor. All right. Although the reported distances that are listed here on the map are fairly accurate, it's probably not sensible to report long distances between cities to the exact nearest mile. It might be better to round those distances to the nearest 10 miles. Sometimes driving times are less reliable because of bad weather, traffic, road construction, any other thing that kind of might get in your way while you're driving. It's probably sensible to think that driving times might be off up to about 30 minutes for every 5 hours reported on the travel map. Therefore, that's why you can see these times, or it's a good idea to round times to the nearest hour, and why you can see the mileage distances in whole numbers. Nothing was reported in a decimal.